first initial thoughts, upon landing in Canada for university?
I remember I landed and we were on our way, like we were coming back from the airport. My first thought was that it was very similar to Melbourne in the sense that like the streets were big. And I know it sounds, see, that's the thing, like when you come somewhere different, I'm sure you can relate, like even the smallest things, you notice like the tiniest little things. Like back home we don't have big streets, like our highway is only 2 roads. It's one going this way and one going this way, that's it. Like even the biggest highway in the country, only 2 roads, like only 2 lanes. And so I came here and there was like 6 lanes on the DP and I was like, holy shit, like where am I? So I made a lot of comparisons to the environment I was in as a child, so that's the first thing that struck me. And then yeah, just how like open it was. Like there's like green areas, or there's a lot of parks. We don't have that back home. A lot of areas in the city for people to just like hang out and chill, and you see open spaces, you see skating in the wintertime, things that we don't have. Like our infrastructure back home is extremely lacking in terms of like open spaces for youth to do things in the city, whatever. So I just noticed that there were so many more opportunities for you to like do stuff outside that I didn't have back home.
Awesome. Have any of those thoughts that that you had when you first landed changed as you learn more about Toronto, the city, the people, anything?
I wouldn't say they've changed. I think I just learned much more. When you first come here, like my house was in one specific environment, so I only knew that. And then in time, I started checking out the city more, seeing different parts of it. And so I just started learning more about the different areas. This is what you can find in this area and this one. So I think my knowledge of the city has just expanded, not necessarily changed. But I've gained an extremely, extremely high appreciation of Toronto, and I love it as a city. I think it's amazing because you just don't see this kind of mixture anywhere else in the world. Like it's amazing how many things you can find here that you just like you can think about something else on the other side of the world, and I'm pretty sure there will be somewhere here where you can go and find it. And that's I feel like sometimes a lot of people that were born and raised here take it for granted, but going somewhere else where you have a complete lack of access to so many things, you start to like really, really appreciate Toronto for what it is. There's a lot of different things like that.
So
the things like I've just never
if you
been
don't
down
mind
here,
me
to be
asking,
honest.
where do you live now in Toronto, and what do you think?
I actually live downtown. I live like not even 5 minutes away from school. I live right at the corner of Church and Gerrard, where the Starbucks is.
And what do you think about that area?
Well, I have my opinions. I love the fact that it's so centralized. It's right next to campus. It means I get to like leave my house at like 8:05 if I have class at 8. So I love the location. I love the fact that, up until pretty late at night, there's still people around. I don't necessarily feel not safe, walking home or whatever. I mean, there are not so good areas of Toronto as well. I feel like when you're at my house, if you cross like to the other side of the street, maybe it's not that safe. Just saying. But those areas are anywhere. Any city you go to, there's gonna be a good area and a bad area. Like they're all ideas that people have. Maybe they're not as bad as you think. So I like it nonetheless, and I think it's the first place ever since I moved to Toronto that has actually felt like home. I actually look forward to going home and like making food in my kitchen and like staying in my own bed, which is something that if it's not somewhere you feel comfortable, you generally just don't like going home. So just because of that, I enjoy my house now.
Awesome. Okay, just pause for 1 second, sorry. So, is there anything that you like or dislike about Toronto?
There's many things I like, as I mentioned before, the different places, so accessible and so cool. Like there's so many things that go on in Toronto. I feel like every day, even if I don't have plans, especially the fact that I live downtown, there's so much going on, but I can just leave my house and there's probably going to be something going on at Yonge and Dundas. There's going to be some kind of festival or concert, and so I like that. I like the fact that there is still a sense of community, even though it is such a large city. Like there's certain spots that I found that I see the same people almost every night. It's become a very homey place for me. I wouldn't necessarily say that there's anything. Actually, no, that's a lie. The only thing I don't like is that everyone is always in a rush. It's a big comparison I make to back home because Albania and European culture in general is much more relaxed. So, you know, people are just like at coffee shops all day, they're just chilling, like they just don't care about anything. And then here, you know, everyone is always running for somewhere. I'm like, I take fault in that too, you know. It's always like, I'm going to school, I'm going to work, I'm going here, I'm going there. And I feel like we never take a moment to relax, but it's because the pace of the city is so fast that you can never like calm down because you're going to feel like you're behind. So I guess that's the only thing that I wish people would just like relax and calm down a little bit more.
Okay, so what about Toronto would you say is most significant to you or most important?
I don't know. I love a lot of things about the city. I don't know. It's weird. Like after being here for a while, I tend to find myself now being like very proud to be from Toronto. Like I resonate with it a lot. I like the community here. I like the culture. And just, I don't know, I think there's this general pride, especially in the last few years, of people living in Toronto. Like you're very proud to say like, oh yeah, I'm from Toronto, I live here. And I think that's what's come to be something that I like a lot because it like brings people together, right? It's a community. I genuinely feel like I am in a community. And it's become something really important for me to identify or like to resonate with the fact that I'm from here. Well, I mean, depending on your definition of where you're from, but you know.
Awesome. Okay, so how do you think Toronto would be considered unique or special?
I think there's a lot of things that make Toronto special. One, I mean, I mentioned it several times, but just the fact that it's such a melting pot for different cultures. And I think it's the fact that here, it's not necessarily, because there's a lot of cities in the world where, there's different people from different backgrounds living there, different cultures. It's the fact that in Toronto, like, it's just so accepting and open. Because I've seen other cities where there can be a lot of different people, but you know, there's still a little bit of segregation, be it obvious or not obvious, you know, or people just tend to kind of stick into their own communities, or it's not as open. But here, like, everything is celebrated, right? Every culture is celebrated, everything. And I'm not saying that Toronto is perfect. Obviously, there is still cases everywhere, and especially at this time in the world, right, of hate crimes happening and things like that, which are very sad. But in general, you get a more welcoming and safe vibe out of Toronto, right? If you have something from your background that you want to share with me, everyone's like, oh my god, yeah, tell me. Like, everyone just wants to do everything else and genuinely integrate them in other people's culture without being like weird about it, right? So open. And I think that's what makes it different, rather than just a place where, oh yeah, you can have a lot of immigrants, but it's not as like welcoming about it. So
okay, awesome. So what about Toronto do you think would be so attractive to other international students?
It's funny because I work in international student affairs, and so I go to a lot of conferences that speak about things like this. And I was recently somewhere, and one of the sessions was specifically about what attracts students to come to Canada in general. But there were so many people from Toronto that I got a general vibe from that city. The first thing that they said is that the safety. A very large part of international students pick Toronto for the Canada in general, I guess, for the idea that they're going to be safe or welcomed or accepted here. And then I think another thing is obviously the quality of the universities. Like, North America in general, you know, has very well-known universities, are accredited. It's something that you feel like your work is getting, like you're putting in the work for something that's going to pay off later. And also just the fact that you have more equality, in the sense that if you feel like if you come to Toronto, you have more equal opportunities than if you went somewhere else. You're not going to be judged because where you're from, or the color of your skin, or your background. And for the most part, again, there's always issues, but for the most part, you're given equal opportunities in comparison to, you know, your domestic counterparts or someone else.
Awesome. I didn't know that there were so many programs for international students.
It's honestly a world that, like, you kind of stumble into. Like, it's not really something that people know about a lot, but once you fall into it, there's so many opportunities and different, like, programming and stuff that go on for international students.
No, because the things like when I first landed for, like, you know, international student services, I didn't really get much of that, at least from, like, you know, advertising or anything like that.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, it's sad because it's not it's not advertised enough, and I think that's the only sad part. We don't do a good enough job at promoting to other students, but once students figure it out, it's a great world to be in. But you're right, that's a good point.
Yep. Okay, moving on. Has there been someone to help introduce you to the city of Toronto and the communities? And if so, who?
Yeah, there's been a few people. My biggest support and inspiration, 100%, is my sister. She moved to Canada when she was 16, all by herself, and so she is, again, a huge inspiration. She's achieved a lot of success even though she's still very young, and so even though we didn't live together or whatever, she was still a huge part in introducing me to a lot of Canadian culture and custom. I feel like if I were by myself, I would have had a way bigger culture shock than I did, but it was like the little thing, like things that she struggled with when she first came here, and then when I came, she was like, okay, I'm gonna tell you, like, don't do this because I did it and it was really embarrassing, or like I learned this thing, so you should go here. So she was always the one showing me like the shortest way to get somewhere and the best place to go get discounts and how to do this and how to like beat the system and all that. So 100% my sister. And then there has been a few other people, a few close friends from high school who did grow up here and were able to show me around and introduce me to things that I may not have had access to otherwise.
So, have you ever explored the city on your own? And if so, do you have any stories to tell?
Oh, 100%. I got lost so many times when I first came here. Like, I just don't have a good sense of direction, in all honesty. Even though Toronto is pretty simple, like it's just north-south, like most of the streets are just blocks, but I just couldn't seem to comprehend that. So when I first got here, my sister would give me clear instructions like, go here, and then I would, like this one time, like I was trying to come to Ryerson and I ended up walking all the way to the CN Tower, and I had no idea where I was going. I just kept walking and walking, and so at the beginning I kind of accidentally explored a lot of areas because I kept getting lost, and it would take me quite a while to like find my way back, but in the meantime I started being like, okay, I didn't mean to end up here, but this actually looks pretty cool. And so especially my first year, I started exploring a lot of different areas. Also, this is actually really funny. I just love falling asleep, honestly. So when I was in high school, I used to live about half an hour to 40 minutes away, so I used to commute, and so I would always fall asleep on my streetcar ride back. And so this one time I fell asleep on the streetcar and I ended up in Scarborough, and it was like at the end of the road, it was at a loop, and so the driver was like, okay, I've been waiting for you to get up for the whole time. He's like, you need to leave now because I need to leave, like the new driver is coming. And so it happened a couple times where I would fall asleep and end up, and doesn't sound safe, like don't do that. But just because of that, I ended up in different places that I wouldn't have expected. But like, I ended up in Scarborough a few times and I was like, oh, this is super cool, and I started exploring. So I really like exploring by myself. I feel like when you're with someone else, you always have like a purpose, or you're going here, or you're going there. You don't really give yourself time to just like walk around. And then when I'm by myself, because I have nothing better to do and it's like embarrassing to say that I fell asleep on a streetcar, I would just walk around. And so I did, especially my first year, I did a lot of accidental exploring of the city, but it was very fun. Toronto's a really nice place to walk around in. Like I don't feel like I get bored just walking. And so I just accidentally ended up in a lot of different neighborhoods in Toronto, but honestly they're really interesting. I love walking downtown, especially when it's not cold. I love walking to different areas and just checking them out, and I don't really feel like I get tired of them, because almost every area that you go to has some kind of different like landmark, or the buildings are different, or there's just a different kind of vibe or community in that area. It makes it special. So I really like exploring the city.
Awesome. So, what have you seen in Toronto that you think is unique to this place?
I think, and this just comes down to the fact that there are so many different communities in Toronto, but I just love going somewhere and feeling like you're completely in a different place. Like you can go from downtown and it's all skyscrapers and buildings and you feel like you're in New York or whatever, and then you walk 10 minutes like closer to Spadina and you're in Chinatown, and you get completely immersed in a different culture. Like they're actually speaking their language and they're serving their food and their tradition. And so that's what I love more about it. It makes it so unique because like you can just spend 10 minutes walking from one block to another and it literally feels like you're in a different country.